Welcome back. It is week number 16 in the Virtues Museletter. I am your host, Barbara McKenzie, and I hope you have had a wonderful week with steadfastness. This podcast is about experiencing and integrating the virtues, mixing the spirit of virtues with the body. And this podcast is about bridging that connection. I do want to address a little bit of the housekeeping, the editing. I'm a bit of a slow talker, so I spend a bit of time editing, cutting the silence between each word, and it renders the recording a bit choppy, and I sound a bit breathy, and some words get clipped a bit too short. The system isn't perfect, and neither am I, thank God. But I am keeping on, as the steadfast quote talked about last week. And I have spent this week the experiences that have happened. Gosh, it takes a lot of energy to stay steady when we're holding on and riding the waves of chaos. There's a lot of people I know who are in absolute chaos right now. But here's the thing. I learned many, many years ago about stages of transition. And if I haven't told you this already, listen up, because this may help you understand a little bit more or have a little trust or faith in what's happening in your world right now. So I learned that transition has 3 stages. Stage 1 is called the end. Stage 2 is called the chaos. And stage 3 is called the beginning. So if you think about those 3 stages, we need to end something in order to be in the chaos. And with every ending, there is a degree of time in chaos. And then you come into the change and you start anew. And that is the beginning. I've learned this through a woman named Michelle Tocher, Tocher. She is based in Toronto, or was at the time. And this idea of transition having 3 stages has helped me be steadfast. What Michelle taught us was that there's a 3-headed gatekeeper that keeps us from entering. So I envision the 3-headed gatekeeper much like a gargoyle, but one head is fear, one head is duty, and the other head is status. So fear will keep us locked in and too afraid to move forward. And duty will keep us committed to a degree that we will sacrifice ourselves. And status is much the same, but I think with status, maybe financial, I don't know, maybe it's monetary tied up in that. But those are the 3 heads. And I think knowing that they are what they are gave me some courage to move around in my life. It gave me some wiggle room, knowing that fear and duty and status were the things stopping me from moving toward change. And that if I could just get over the fear, the duty, or the status, whatever stuckness I'm in, then it changes the playing field. It really does. So think about that for a minute. If we are too dutiful, we may not even enter into the end. We may not even broach the subject. And I think status holds us there as well. We feel like we can't move because this is my role in life. And then fear, of course, is kind of the same gremlin, and that's why it's a three-headed, because they all have roots in the same kind of inertia, which keeps us from moving into change. So that's a little bit about what I've been thinking about this week is, how do I stay steady? And what happens when I get blown off course? How do I course correct? And let's face it, self-regulation may be the most important ingredient in the communication process. If we can get a handle on our own emotions and regulate our own self, it benefits everyone. So steadfastness really is like a ballast. It helps me to regulate. Okay, let's get on with our virtues pick. I am shuffling my deck of 100 virtues reflection cards from the Virtues Project at www.virtuesproject.com. What virtue will rise to the surface for us in week number 16? It is tolerance. Tolerance helps us to accept differences and frees us from being judgmental. It is recognizing that all people have feelings, needs, hopes, and dreams. Tolerance is an appreciation for adversity, whether of culture or temperament. It leads to unity. It is being patient and forgiving when others make mistakes while calling on discernment to know when to stand up for justice. Tolerance is accepting things that we wish were different with humor and grace. It allows us to embrace the pain as well as the joy of life. On the back of the card, there's a quote by Carl Jung. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The practice of tolerance. I appreciate differences. I free myself from prejudice. I refrain from judging myself or others. I forgive mistakes. I accept what I cannot change. I balance acceptance with justice. I am thankful for the gift of tolerance. It broadens my horizons. Well, honestly, I find with so much diversity in the world, tolerance is such a tricky virtue. And I think the quote on the back says everything. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When I think about the soul and the ego and where in that spectrum lies tolerance, I think each side has its own spectrum. I mean, that it just makes sense to me. And at the deepest level, my ego doesn't tolerate a lot these days. My capacity for tolerance is becoming less and less. I'm feeling like my cortisol levels are exhausted. And that's what happens when culture gets stressed and fear takes over, and we have this dynamic between ego and soul. I feel like that's the dance that I'm caught in at the moment. So I can, right now, because I'm not triggered, I can imagine being able to step back in a moment of irritation and remembering that I can practice more kindness, or I can practice more patience, or I can practice more understanding. before I go leaping forward into a moment that I need to then forgive my own mistakes. When I think about the dynamic between the ego and the soul, tolerance is quite empowering because it feels to me naturally available to my soul, whereas my ego has to struggle to find it. I have to dig really deep. So this really gives me pause right now as I'm considering, unless we're connected to a faith community, I believe it's like anything. If we don't use it, we lose it. And as children, we come in, I believe, with our eyes wide open. And then as we grow, that changes and we become unable to see the spirit side of things. Maybe when that hole in the skull hardens up, our soul vision disappears. I'm being silly. Yeah, tolerance for me this week is all about considering that the dance between the soul and the ego. And how do I regulate my tolerance on the ego side? The other journal question I'm going to be working with this week is, what else do I need to let go of ego's grip on things like tolerance so that I can fully integrate with the virtue of tolerance? And I've already answered some of that earlier. I talked about requiring more patience and requiring more understanding. And I also talked about the word ballast. So I just want to touch on that for a minute. Ballast, in theory, is a word that they use to describe a counterweight in shipping. So in a ship, in the vessel itself, the wind and the storms and the water would blow it off course if it wasn't for the ballast. And the ballast is the weight that they add into the bottom of the ship to keep it submerged to a certain degree. There's a real science behind it. I got thinking about ballast in terms of our body and our ability to self-regulate. If spirit is the water and the vessel is my ego, what is the ballast? When a ship is empty of freight, they fill it with water to create the ballast. And I believe, depending on whether they're picking up cargo or emptying it, that volume of ballast changes in order to accommodate a certain amount of steadfastness. So this idea is really intriguing me. And we are ego, we are soul, and we are also the ballast of our own journey. I mean, there's so many ways I can create metaphor around this. It's not even funny. And as you journey along the waters of your life, may the virtue of tolerance help to bring ballast to your vessel and enable the journey to be steadfast, patient, and understanding. Yeah. Thanks for being here. And I hope you have a wonderful week.